Hello, my name is Chubbo, and I run Plus for World. And I've just released a game called Death Sector. And so I want to talk about it quite a bit. There's a lot to say about this game. I think I'm just going to try and do this in one shot and just go through everything that's in my mind with like minimal editing, because it just takes so much effort to cut everything together. So I'm assuming that whoever is going to watch/listen to this, it's just going to be a handful of people, and so you guys won't mind anyway if this is put together a little bit haphazardly. Okay, so probably the first thing to cover is the history of this game. So originally this was made in 1992 by The Beast and Unreal, and it was barely a prototype of a game. So what we have is the player can move a ship around. It's a flip screen game, so when you leave one screen, it just flips to another. On every screen, there is exactly 3 enemies and one extra hazard, which is this volcano shooting thing. And there's not much else to it. There's really no scoring yet, no story, no colors. The whole thing is only using 3 colors throughout the game. So you probably can't call it a game. It's a bare bones prototype. So this particular prototype or game was saved by Unreal, along with a whole bunch of other stuff that him and The Beast were working on back in the day, around 92. And we had an internal list between a couple of these friends of various projects where we said, like, hey, these are projects that would be good to finish one day, quote unquote. And from that particular list, several projects have eventually been completed, and this was one of them. It was always kind of on the radar to like, hey, we got to do something with that sector. So the first crack that I took at trying to actually make this happen was in 2010. So I'm going to show off a bunch of behind the scenes things that nobody has ever seen. So here's the first thing, which is the 2010 version of the game. What I have done is basically taken the original code apart, replaced the screen drawing routines with a tile system. The tiles are 4 characters by 3 characters. So that means that instead of storing the entire screen as it is, it can be stored in just a couple of bytes, literally. And I built a sample level out of this. There is already a rudimentary map function, and some additional color, but there's still no story, no real purpose to any of it. We needed to come up with the gameplay itself, like what is the game? Even in the final product, you could say, yeah, it's still what it was in the beginning, which is you just walk around with your spaceship. So the problem with this version is that I couldn't find anyone who would be able to build the levels. So this was abandoned, and I was looking around, and I found the first message that I sent to Kichi in 2019 September. And I just asked him, hey, there's this old game that I want to finish one day. Would you be willing to help with making the graphics? And he said, yeah, let's take a look. And I think that we do a big pause after that. And the first prototype that I have after is in 2022. So that's 3 years ago. My gosh, so long. But that already uses Kichi's graphics. He said that we should switch to a different tile system where each tile is 2 characters by 2 characters. And of course, this is a very smart decision. This prototype already is starting to look like the final product. So once I saw that this will work, I started to plan out the entire game. And since I love sci-fi so much, I figured I would come up with just a simple story behind it. I was originally planning for at least 3 levels. I figured 3 levels would be a good amount to hit. The caves, which is basically like introductory level, the player sort of discovers their surroundings and they find a door that leads them into a city. The city is abandoned, and eventually they find a lab which will provide the means of escape. So really the way I came up with the story, I had nothing else to go on other than the name of the game, Death Sector. So basically it's a mishmash of a whole bunch of different ideas. So for example, warp drives exist in Star Trek, and so do impulse engines. But in Star Trek, when you want to go to warp speed, you don't need a launch gate. The launch gate exists in a whole bunch of different sci-fi universes, where it's like some consecutive rings that you can fly through, and it speeds up your ship. So obviously the reason why I chose to also implement that was because on the third level, you need to activate one of these. You find one of these and you need to activate it. That's sort of the final puzzle that you need to get through. Also, I'll try not to spoil too many things. And so I'll just say that there are multiple ways of playing through this game. You can basically just sort of go around and solve it and get out at the end, or you can try to piece together the story of what happened. And on each of the levels, there's a little bit of a story beat, and that will lead to at least a different message at the end. There's also many ways to die. You can self-destruct by pressing escape. You can basically crash if your impulse engine gives out. You can also crash if all your shields give out. There is also one particular ending, which I call the bad ending. I don't know if anyone will run into it, but I figured that somebody might try this. I'm again not going to spoil this, but what I want to emphasize here is that I put a lot of effort into making everything work and trying to think of all these scenarios, like what would happen if a player attempted to do this and that. And even as it is, not everything that I originally planned made it into the game. But I'm jumping a little bit ahead of myself here. I think it'd be good to show a couple of the original plans. So this was the plan for the cave, which it's like ridiculously badly drawn, just like a rough layout. And when you see the final map that Kichi made, it's just incredible. It gives it so much life. And so what I wanted to mention and tell you guys is that it was a lot of fun to work with Kichi, and because we sort of played off of each other. So I would make like a rough plan and say, okay, I think I could put this kind of puzzle here, that, and then he would come up with the graphics for it. And once I saw what he came up with, I'm like, oh wait, this looks like something, and then I would add something on that. We kind of went back and forth. So it was a ton of fun to actually come up with all these ideas. And in addition, so the way the game works is it's running in character mode, not graphics mode. And so in character mode, you only have 256 characters on the screen at any given time. And in the game, you can have up to 3 enemies. Or, well, in my version, once I took over the code, I basically rewrote everything. And yeah, I mean, that should be obvious by seeing the original prototype compared to where we ended up. But so yeah, you can have up to 3 hazards per screen, and that takes up a lot of characters. So Kichi only had about 160 or so characters that he could use to actually build the tiles, and then out of those tiles to build everything that you guys see. But of course, I'm always trying to push everything further and further and further. So I had this idea that on every level we should have at least one screen which had its own character set, and it's completely different graphics, and it's only used at that one place. So on the first level, this should be very obvious that it's that large mushroom. I hope that whoever played the game had an absolute wow moment when they saw that. If you didn't, it's just because, well, you're just thinking, oh, okay, the graphics is here or whatever. But if you just think about it a little bit of how difficult that is. So on that, the way the map is actually done, Kichi gave me everything minus that one room. That one room is completely blank on the map. And it's made by using a custom character set, a custom color map, and a custom character map. And the second level, the city, and the third level, the lab, also have one of these screens. And I'm not going to spoil them, but if you're looking at the levels with this in mind, it should be obvious, because it'll be like, just, wow, why is this one so different? That suddenly the graphics is like very unique. So we pushed ourselves a little bit on that and managed to squeeze that in. Now, out of the 3 levels, by far the city is the largest. So it has the most rooms, the most player interactions, and just like the city is literally could be considered 2 levels. You could consider the city and the sewers. The way I approach all of it is I wanted to use some cool demo effects, but in a way that they make sense in game. So, for example, I figured, well, we could do a plasma, but what to do with the plasma? Oh, how about this? How about there's an airlock in which the superheated gas has been trapped. And then there you go. Now it makes sense. Now it's actually part of the story, and there's a little explanation at the beginning of the second level, like what's actually going on with this. Or I wanted to do like a fire effect, which is, again, very common in demos. But I wanted it to be integral to the story and integral to the world. So, when you're going through a sewer, there is an incinerator in sewers. That's completely normal. That's something that you would see. Same thing for an air purifier, which is that little bubble effect that's before the fire, and everything else that, I managed to squeeze in. They were kind of, this is how they were designed. In addition, there's a couple of things that I made prototypes for, but they never made it into the game. So here's one of them. This was just something that I thought maybe could be used, but we ended up not using it. This is a raster split example. Again, never made it into the game. And here's one more, which was an audio log, but an actual audio log. So I figured if I use a 1-bit diggy, I could do some audio playback. But this also didn't make it into the game. So getting back to the history part, we managed to wrap up the first 2 levels. And when we were working on the third one, Kichi and I sort of hit like a creative roadblock and the project crawled to a halt. So there was a big pauses, like, several months passed where nothing progressed. And in particular, the last 2 rooms of the game was something that we were stuck on a very long time. I actually really like those 2 rooms now that they are in the game, so it was worth the wait. And then interestingly, the entire project actually got wrapped up in 2004 October. And at that point, I already had plans that I should make a physical release and put this game on a cassette. So I reached out to TLC and asked him what his opinion was about using a cassette turbo. And he said he would be willing to create a new one. And that, unfortunately, kind of held up the project for many, many months. But again, it's one of those things that I think it was worth the wait. So he had an idea of how to do a custom IRQ loader turbo, but the first couple of tries that he didn't work out. And eventually, he managed to create one, which is what you guys are seeing in the cassette version of the game. It's extremely fast, and as far as we know, it's reliable, so I hope that people will appreciate that. I hope that some people will actually load up the cassettes and play the game that way. Okay, a little bit about the music. Originally the game didn't have a main theme, but even before it was finished, I was already thinking about releasing it and had all these various ideas. And one of them was that it would be fun to make a cinematic trailer for the game. So I created that, it's on my YouTube channel. And I needed a little, a powerful theme for it, and that's how I came up with those couple of notes, which then later on I implemented as the intro music of the game. Now, in game, there's a few innovations, although it's only innovations for Commodore Plus 4 software. This is something that has been done all the way back in the 90s. But so what do I mean? What I'm trying to say is, for example, in the lab level, as you progress between screens, the music will seamlessly add instruments to itself. So it starts out with just drums, and then the bass kicks in, and then some chords kick in, and then the melody kicks in, and the melody changes, and so on. And this is seamless, so it doesn't really matter which part of music is at. You can just switch between rooms, and it'll just change accordingly. And similarly, in that level as well, anytime you do like an action that the game rewards, positively, it'll play a little jingle. But it's completely smooth. It's part of the music. So the way that's done, the chord progression only uses 4 chords, and so the jingle is composed in a way that I have that I have a version of the same jingle that fits with each of those 4 chords. And so what the music player will do is just temporarily switch to different music, to that particular pattern that matches the chord that's playing at that moment, and then switch back. So again, unless you know what's going on, you might not even notice that something tricky like this has been implemented, but it's all there. And then the same way, in the first level, there is when you reach the waterfall, the music will stop, and once you figure out how to progress, the music will have like a little drum fill and kick back in. So this is basically tied to the player's action, and I feel like it helps the mood a lot. And there is another similar thing, which is when you enter the sewers, the music will behave accordingly. If you guys do play the game, you will know what I mean. I'm pretty happy with it. The music turned out pretty good. the player that is used in the intro and the ending is playing 3 voices natively on the Plus 4. I call this particular one Digisaw or Digisaw. I don't even know how to pronounce it. It doesn't matter. But one interesting thing about it is that the quality of the playback has improved since the first iteration of this particular player, which was in my game called Defiance. And so the best version of it was released in Tetsuya Fish's game, which in Donkey Kong. And so I backported the improvements to the intro and to the ending. So a couple of more things. Once I had the story in my mind, I wanted to write a little prologue, and the purpose of that was to introduce most of the things that are featured in the game. So if somebody reads the prologue, they will sort of understand that, okay, there is such a thing as a warp drive, there's such a thing as an impulse drive. Going through customs is something that the inhabitant of this universe deal with, and so on. Now, choosing names for non-player characters is never easy. So what I've done is I've referenced a whole bunch of different things, and most of them are from Peter F. Hamilton, who is an excellent sci-fi writer. And I don't know who still reads in 2025, but I read The Void trilogy by him. These are excellent books. I recommend it to everyone. And Paula Mayo, who is, well, you could say that she's an integral part of that sector, is from these books. There's a whole bunch of other references as well. For example, Insufficient Data for a Meaningful Answer is by Asimov. And if you pay attention, I think you will notice other references as well. That was a lot of fun for me to put those in. Okay, and then finally, just a little bit more about the technical aspects of the game. So the way the levels work is done in a way that each room has its own initialization code and its own per screen call. So what that means is whenever, for example, when you enter the waterfall, that code that you see on screen is specific to just that one room. So this approach allowed me to basically have each room to be its own little minigame. And you guys will definitely see that there. For example, in the warehouse in the city, for example, where you find the 2 switches and you need to move the boxes around, that in itself is its own little subsystem with its own variables and so on. So you could say that I programmed not just one game, but a whole bunch of games. So like I said, every screen has its own code, although obviously there are a lot of, you could say, empty rooms in which the per screen code doesn't really do much other than perhaps move the enemies and such. So I think I covered a lot. I'm very happy to push this project out the door. I already received some very positive feedback from you guys, so I appreciate that. Obviously, I have to thank a lot of people. First one is Kichi. Without him, this project would have not been able to complete. Second is obviously Unreal. He's a fantastic illustrator. He did the title screen and all the cover arts for the cassettes. We're still before putting in the order for cassette duplication, so I am super curious to see how it will turn out. I would love to finally hold this in my hand. When you know that this is a project that technically started in 1992, but for me personally, at least since 2010, that's a long time to wait for something to be completed. Next person I want to thank is BS. The original turbo, the 1541 turbo that I used, had a couple of issues, and BS is just like a hardware genius. I can't fathom how these guys know so much, but basically he fixed up the turbo for me to get rid of all those issues, and now the loading is a lot more reliable. Same goes for Shiz. He's just so smart, these guys. Oh man, they know everything about drives. He did a lot of testing and gave me a lot of invaluable feedback. Next person is TLC. I mean, okay, the cassette turbo, that's like its own whole story. I think it will be released publicly on GitHub. It's just amazing. Another shout out I want to give to Ulysses777. The interesting thing was, so I already asked TLC to do this turbo for me, and he said, okay, I'm working on it. And then after that, I reached out to Ulysses on Plus 4 World and asked him, hey, what do you think about which turbo would be good to use if I ever wanted to like release something on cassette? And to that, he basically responded by releasing his own IRQ loader turbo, which I technically could have used, I think, but I told him, well, I've already asked someone else, so I'm waiting for this one to be finished. But regardless, I wanted to thank him for that. Thanks to everybody who helped with testing, and thank you guys just for being part of Plus 4 World and keeping the scene alive.